Since Ed mentioned that I'm from New Orleans, I have to tell you my New Orleans joke. George Bush was thinking of invading New Orleans because we have all sorts of weapons of mass destruction and chemical weapons like Tabasco sauce, gumbo, and things like that. And some moderate member of his administration said, no, George, don't invade. Send inspectors as a moderate way of going about this. And George said, no, we tried that. We sent inspectors down there, and they came back 50 pounds heavier and drunk. So we can't send inspectors down there anymore. The talk that I'll be giving today is based on a book that I co-authored with James Gortney and Robert Lawson called Economic Freedom in the World. Before I go any further, I'm going to be showing some slides later, and I looked at them from the back of the room and you can't see them. So I would ask everyone who's not in the first 10, 12 rows to come down this way if you want to see what I'll be putting up. And I'm told that there'll be test exam questions based on this stuff, so you better get down here so you can see it, because it's silly to attend a lecture and not be able to see what the lecturer is trying to show you. So please, unless, let's say, that guy and the gal with the yellow shirt and her with the black, if you're in front of them, you're okay, but if you're behind them, you're not going to be able to see. So please come on down toward the front. I'll be showing these in about 5 minutes, so you've got some time to get down toward the front. What we did in this book is we constructed an index of economic freedom. We compared 102 countries on the basis of how much economic freedom they had. And then we correlated economic freedom to try to see if there's any cause or effect relationship between economic freedom and GDP, or change in GDP, or life expectancy, or income equality, or a whole host of other variables. That in a nutshell is what we did, but before explaining and going into the statistical details, which I'll be putting up on the screen, I want to talk a little bit for a few minutes about why we did this. One of the motivating forces for me is a group called Freedom House. Now, Freedom House has done yeoman work and good work in trying to measure not economic freedom, but civil liberties and political freedom. Is there a fair trial in the country? Is there voting allowed? Are there juries of your peers? Is habeas corpus upheld? Do they engage in torture? Is there a rule of law? Things like that. And on those issues, which you'd call maybe political or civil liberties freedom, they were pretty good. I had no real objections, even though they were sort of a pinko lefty group, and I'm not usually associated with pinko lefties, but on this they were pretty good. Sort of like American Civil Liberties Union. They're good on some free speech issues, but you can only go so far. But then what the Freedom House did is they launched a new initiative. And in this new initiative, they were now going to measure economic freedom, which is a big departure from political freedom or civil liberties freedom. They're now going to do economic freedom. And what do they mean by economic freedom? Well, what they mean by economic freedom is high taxes. The higher the tax, the more economic freedom. Or the more welfare payments, the more economic freedom. Or the greater the percentage of workers unionized, the more the economic freedom. Or if there's environmental protection. I don't mean private property rights environmental protection. I mean, this watermelon environmentalists. Watermelons are green on the outside but red on the inside. The commie environmentalists. So that was their vision of economic freedom, and my thought was that if they get away with this, given their heightened public scrutiny, they would then veer the conversation toward this sort of a definition of economic freedom, and that's the last thing I wanted, because I don't believe that that's really what economic freedom is. Another motivation for going to this book is to write what I thought I saw as an imbalance. Now, there is a branch of economics called economic development. Not every school has a course on that. I don't know if you have a course on that here, but if not, I'm sure you implicitly cover that in other courses. Now, what it is addressing the question is, why is it that we in the West have rights, comfortable existence, you can buy food very cheaply, we live a pretty good life. We might not all have Maseratis and Rolls Royces, but we can get a Volkswagen or a 10-year-old car that gets us around. Whereas in other countries, they're really on the verge of starvation. They have no electricity. They don't. Here, everyone's got a TV, a radio, a fan, a telephone. In many countries of the world, they don't have these things. Well, why is it? Are we so bloody smart? Or is it that we have, or is it that we're efficient? Or is it that we have equity? Well, my view of the subcategory of economics that addresses itself to these questions is that 90% they think it's efficiency, 9%, this is just numbers right off the top of my head, is equity, and 1% is freedom or economic liberty. Whereas the way I see it, economic liberty is way, way more important as an explanatory variable for why we have reasonable standards of living. We're not all Bill Gates, we don't have mansions, so we don't have a tennis court in our living room, but by and large, in world standards, we're doing pretty well. Why is it? I contend it's because of economic freedom. So I'm very passionately interested in measuring what economic freedom is. Another reason is that economists love to correlate things. I mean, if you're going to be given econometric tools, you might as well try to correlate things. Well, the more variables, the better, so you can correlate one more. And that sort of makes students' lives miserable because, you have one more variable now to worry about that you didn't have to worry about before, and that can't be all bad. We economists are sadistical. Another reason is sort of, why climb Mount Everest? Because it's there. Well, why construct a new index of economic freedom? Because it's there in our minds, and we want to give substance to what's in our minds, put it on paper, make people talk about it, or entice people to talk about it. A little bit more about economic development. A lot of the mainstream people think that the way to economic development is government, have infrastructure, highways, ports, things like that. Foreign aid is a big thing. They say that the more foreign aid an undeveloped country gets, the more economic development it'll have. Socialism sometimes. Let me read you a brief quote from Gunnar Myrdal, who won the Nobel Prize in 1974. He said, "The special advisors to underdeveloped countries who have taken the time and trouble to acquaint themselves with the problem all recommend central planning as the first condition of progress." So in other words, if you're the head of an undeveloped country and you want to drag them kicking and screaming out of the 17th or 18th century economic system and into the 20th or 21st, economic planning, socialism, government. And we were trying to argue with that. People who, in addition to Myrdal, who are famous for this sort of a thing, are a guy named Ebsy Dilmar and Walt Rostow. My favorite economist in the development area is the late Peter Bauer. Peter Bauer was my favorite developmental economist, and he had a very different view as to what creates economic development in these third world countries. And in his view, it was free enterprise and economic liberty. Another reason for pushing to get an index which would measure what had been before not been measured. Peter Bauer is famous for the 3 M's. You've heard of M&M candy? Well, this is M&M. And his 3 M's were an attempt to indicate what the result of foreign aid was. And the 3 M's were first, monuments, second, Mercedeses, and third, machine guns. And that's what he said that most foreign aid went for, and I think that's true. Now, it doesn't have to be a monument, it doesn't have to be a statue to the dictator. It could be a steel mill that makes steel that costs 5 times as much as the steel that you could import. Or it could be an airline that charges prices because they're so inefficient that 10 times the price of any other airline that could have come into the country. Monuments. Mercedes is, well, that's what the dictators would drive around in. And we all know what they use machine guns for to keep the people down. So that's his view of economic development, foreign aid subcategory, and I agree with him entirely. If one of you wake up tomorrow and find that you're the president, the prime minister, the dictator of a third world country, if you attend this lecture and pay attention to it, you'll know what to do to bring your country into economic prosperity. And don't think that this is impossible. We have Star Trek, we have X-Files, we have all sorts of weird things. We have these movies where someone was, that actor, the big heavy guy, became king of England. So it can happen to you. And if it happens to you, thanks to this lecture, hopefully, you will now have a much better idea of how to lead your country into prosperity and away from starvation and warfare and other horrible things. Namely, to promote economic freedom, which is a lot easier than getting more technology or more education or more investment. All those things cost resources. It takes a lot of effort to get new investment into the country or to teach people. Education obviously will help. But economic freedom is the sort of thing that you can do with a snap of a finger. All you have to do is change the laws. Now, it's not that easy because the minds of the people are pretty indicative of what's going to happen. My colleague Jeff Hummel is never tired of saying something that has inspired me, namely that the pen is mightier than the sword. Why does Jeff say that the pen is mightier than the sword? If you think of a duel between a pen, which is as big as my finger, and a sword, which is as big as my arm, you'd think that the sword would beat the pen. But Jeff's point, Professor Hummel's point, is that the pen determines in which way the sword is aimed. If you can convince people's hearts and minds, the sword turns around. So in that sense, the pen is much mightier than the sword. And what I'm peddling here is pens, not swords. The hope is that you can take these ideas and utilize them for the betterment of mankind. Another motivation for writing this book was to promote economic freedom, to promote freedom. Does freedom consist of welfare rights? Does freedom consist of equal income? Or egalitarianism? I don't think so. I think freedom is something different. Non-intervention, non-aggression. And also, my last motivation, that as I'm listing motivation, is that a statistic tends to lend reality to a concept. Before unemployment was measured, the concept of unemployment was more vague and nebulous than it was after we could measure it. It's still real to individual people, but when you measure it, it adds some more impetus. Well, my hope is that if we can measure economic freedom, it'll make economic freedom come more alive than it would otherwise be. Okay, so those are the motivations, and now let me discuss what I think economic freedom is. As a rough approximation, anyone should be free to do anything they damn well please, provided only that they respect the equal rights of everyone else to do the same with their person and property. So the free market consists of the concatenation of all voluntary events. If I trade you my tie for your wristwatch, it must mean on your part that you value the time more than the wristwatch you give up, and you gain the difference between them in your evaluation. And it must mean that if I am willing to give up my tie for your wristwatch, that I value your wristwatch more than the tie that I'm giving up. So we both gain. Markets are mutual benefit machines, if I can coin a phrase. Markets are not exploitation. There's no exploitation. This is the way we cooperate with each other. And that's exactly what a market is, this sort of barter for a wristwatch for a time. And every market incident is just like that. I buy a newspaper for $1. It must mean that I value the newspaper more than $1. Otherwise, I wouldn't give up $1 for it. It must mean that the news vendor values the newspaper less than $1. He's got tons of them around. He's happy to take $1 for his newspaper. I go to work for $20,000. It must mean that my employer values my labor services more than $20,000 and I value them less than my foregone leisure. So that's what the market is. It's voluntary trade based on private property. And economic freedom is just the right of everyone to engage in market transactions. Okay, those are market transactions. What's a non-market transaction? A non-market transaction is coercion. It's punching. It's shooting, it's raping, it's murdering, it's stealing, it's committing fraud, it's committing counterfeiting. There are many, many ways of... No, there are only two ways that we can interact with each other. One is the voluntary, sometimes called the economic means, where it's based on mutuality and agreement and voluntariness. That's one way we can interact with each other. And the other way we can interact with each other is punch each other and grab their stuff. And what economic freedom says is, let's interact in the first way. The first way is a good way. The second way is not a good way. If I had a blackboard here, which I don't, then I do. But I can't go that far away. There's some tethered here.
Wait. Let me move the blackboard.
Yeah. Move the blackboard towards me. I did have I think I have some leeway. I can move. It's sort of like an attack dog. You don't have to worry because I can't go further than my leash. So that's why I wanted you toward the front so I can fight you. Just kidding. What some economists do is they draw a curve like this, and this is the percentage of government involved in the economy, and this is economic freedom. And the contention is, and here we see, say 10%. 10% of the economy is run by government. And what the contention underlying this book is that once you get past this point, the more government you have, the less economic freedom. Now, there are some people that say that the curve goes like this. Namely, that you need a certain minimal amount of government to underscore rules against murder, theft, rape, and arson and things like that. There are other people who say, no, the curve goes down this way. Namely, the more government you have at any range, the less economic freedom, or the less government, the more economic freedom. And I'm not going to be involved in this range of things. I'm just concerned with this range. Namely, when government gets past a certain point, the more you have of it, the less economic freedom you have. Okay, I don't think that there's too much dispute, at least at this point. Most people, most economists, most economic students would tend to agree that roughly what I said is correct. They might disagree on some jot or tittle, but mainly economic freedom consists of engaging in market activities and non-coercive, non-invasive kinds of activities. But how do you operationalize this? So far I've just been giving you the theory, but talk is cheap. How do we get down to the nitty-gritty? How do we get a statistic going? Well, the way we did it was on the basis of 17 subcomponents based on 4 categories. And before I tell you what they are specifically, they have to meet the following criteria. First, they have to be objective. They can't be subjective. They can't say, well, there's more freedom here than there because I feel freer here than there, because you can't operationalize, you can't give a number to feelings. So you have to have some sort of number. I'm losing myself here. It has to be duplicatable. Namely, we did it, other researchers should be able to get the same numbers as we got if they apply into our definitions. Second criteria, it has to be updatable. Namely, not only do we want to measure economic freedom at a certain point in time, we also want to have what's called a time series. Cross-section would be at a certain amount of time. A time series would be every 5 years or every year or every 10 years so that we can see what the pattern of economic freedom is over time. The third is we want to have a large number of countries. We want to have a large number of countries. We don't want to just have 10 countries. But the more criteria we have, the fewer the countries will have. Because each criteria, not every country will have each statistic that we want. For instance, in the first iteration of this book, and there have been several subsequent publications, we couldn't include China. And that's a problem because China is one of the biggest countries by population, if not the biggest country in the world. But they didn't have the 17 criteria that we thought were important, so we couldn't include them. Later on, they were able to. Okay, what I'm going to do now is show you the results of our research. Namely, we're going to rank all the countries in the world in terms of their economic freedom. And then later I'll tell you what these 17 criteria are on the basis of which we generated these rankings of the various countries. So here comes the first flyer. And it's for this reason that I ask people to move forward, because they're not going to be able to see everything as clearly as they might be able to see it. As you can see, the freest country in the world is Hong Kong with a 9.2. If you can't see this stuff, please move forward. You won't be interrupting anyone. And maybe your eyes are better than mine, but when I was in the middle of the place, I couldn't see. So please feel free to move up if you can't see this stuff. Again, I hold this threat over you that if you don't get these, you have to memorize every statistic here, otherwise you're going to fail the course. No, I'm just kidding. You don't have to memorize every statistic, but it's silly to attend a lecture and not be able to see what the lecturer is asking you to see. I apologize for not making this bigger, but I've never lectured on this in such a big room, and that's the way the cookie crumbles on that. So Hong Kong is the freest country. It gets a 9.2 out of a 10 on a 10-point scale. The best you can get is a 10, the worst you can get is a 0. Hong Kong leads the pack with a 9.2. Singapore is 8.2. This is when Hong Kong was a country. This was in 1995, long before they became a province of China. Third is New Zealand. Some people are fond of saying that the United States is the freest country in the world. Well, according to our research, they're only the fourth freest country, or we're only the fourth freest country. Other very free countries, relatively speaking, are Switzerland, Malaysia, United Kingdom, Thailand, Canada, Japan, and Australia. At the bottom of the pack, the last 10 countries or so are Zimbabwe, Hungary, Nicaragua, Brazil, Burundi, Ivory Coast, Romania, Haiti, Syria, Iran, Algeria, Zaire, and Somalia. These countries have ratings 3 out of 10 or less. Now, I have another way of doing this. It's based on the weighting system. This is one way of doing it, but we had a slightly different way of looking at this. Again, Hong Kong is number 1, but now and Singapore is number 2, and New Zealand is wait, no, that's the wrong one. On this one, Hong Kong is number 1. New Zealand takes over the number 2 spot, and New Zealand and Singapore switch around. The reason for this slightly different way of looking at it is based on the weightings of the 17 criteria. By a weighting, see, if you have 17 criteria, the obvious question is, well, how do you weight them? The first way is you weight them all, you know what I mean by weight, not W-A-I-T, but W-E-I-G-H-T. Meaning how important are each of the components? Now, the obvious and easy first crack at it is that they're all equal. All 17 get 1/17 of the weight of the overall index. Another way to weight this, and we've tried several different ways. One is based on the inverse of the standard deviation, namely the ones where the countries are very diverse. We give less weight to those, and the ones where they're more narrow, the variance or the standard deviation is narrow, then we give a bigger weight. That's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is we took a survey of people in the Non-Pellerman Society, which is an organization which has free enterprise types, and we just said, well, here are our 17 criteria. What do you think is the most important? And all the weight should add up to 100, obviously. So we have different ways of doing this, and on the first one, countries like France and Denmark were tied for 32. Here, Denmark is 16 and France is 20. And the reason for it is that this one here, the one that's now up on the board, has less weight to transfers. Because one of the indices or indications of lack of economic freedom is the government taking money from Peter and giving to Paul. And Denmark and France do that a lot. So this one, do that a lot. So this one there ranked higher because this doesn't give as much weight to income transfers, whereas the other one, which ranked them lower, does. Is that clear? So if you're using a weighting system that gives great weight to income transfers, then negative, then countries like France and Denmark that do it will be lower. Here they're a little bit higher because we're giving a little less weight to that criteria. Here is an indication of the weights. Those are the 17 criteria up and down, monetary expansion, etc. And I'll get into these 17 in a little bit. We have different ways of doing it. The first way is the standard deviation way, and then we have various surveys. The first one is E for equal, and the other two were one a survey of the Non-Pellerman Society and one is a survey of the people that work with us in generating this body of research. Okay, now at long last, I'm ready to get into the 17 criteria. I must be dyslexic or something. first country is the United States, and I'm going to illustrate the first four, namely money and inflation. And I'll talk about Roman numeral 2, 3, and 4 with illustrating the different countries. Okay, so what's going on here? You can see that the United States is a pretty free country. In 1975, had a 6.0. Can you see that? If you can't see it, move forward. My continual refrain. It went up to 6.2, 6.5, 7.4, and 7.7 in 93, 95, the last year for which we had data at this time. So the United States is pretty free. We're the fourth freest in the world, and we're getting freer over time. That's what the bars mean at the top of the diagram. The summary ratings to the left of that indicate the various weighting schemes for the various years. But now let me talk about the four components of money. The four main headings are money, government operation, 3 takings, and 4 the international sector. First, money. What we're saying is that money is an important part of economic freedom. Money is the lifeblood of the economy. Money is to the economy as the bloodstream is to the body. The bloodstream circulating facilitates movement. Well, money facilitates trade. It's very hard to trade wristwatches for times. The problem is the double coincidence of wants. If I have a chicken and I want a pickle, you know the odds of finding a pickle-owning chicken wanter? Very low. So what I do, instead of looking for a guy who's got a pickle and wants a chicken, is I make a 2-stage trade. First, instead of barter, this is the beginning of money. First, I trade in my chicken for something that I think will be acceptable to most people. And it could be fish hooks, it could be silver, it could be calorie shells, and in history, various things that function as the money. And then I take the money, and then I go buy pickles. Now, you think it's difficult, it's silly on my part to make 2 trades when I could have made 1. But due to the lack of double coincidence of wants, it would be very hard to trade pickles for chickens. Much easier to go chickens to, I don't know what, silk, and then silk for the pickle. Now, over the course of history, various things have tried to be money. You can see why bananas wouldn't make a good money, because they get rotten, and, who wants to be left holding the banana when it gets rotten? So, certain things are good monies and certain things are bad monies. And in the free enterprise community, one of the best things that ever became money was gold. Gold is good because it's portable. Cement isn't portable because per unit value, you need a ton of it to make any value at all, and it's hard to transport a ton of cement, whereas an ounce of gold would be worth as much as that, or 1/10 of an ounce of gold. Plus, gold is malleable. You can cut it pretty easily without losing value. Diamonds, you can't make small change in, because if you break up a diamond, the 2 halves are not equal to the whole. They're equal to much less value than the whole, whereas if you break up a gold bar, the 2 bits of it are equally valuable as the whole thing. So gold had advantages that other materials didn't have. And in the heyday of free enterprise in the, 18th and 19th century, gold was pretty much the money. How many countries are on the gold standard now? None. So what we could have done is given every country a 0. I mean, that would be the just solution. Give them all a 0. They're a bunch of commie pinkos, and, they get a 0. But let's get back to reality. What we're trying to do is distinguish between countries. And if we give all countries a 0, we might as well toss that criteria out, because it doesn't make any distinctions between countries. So when you get into empirical research, it's a lot dirtier than pure theory. You have to make compromises, you have to sell out, you have to do all sorts of things. And we did. What we said is, look, one of the bad things that the government does with money is it inflates it. One of the, this is serious business. You might think, well, it's a little boring crap, economics, but, it's really important, because one of the causes of World War II was the German hyperinflation of 1923, which ruined the German economy, which allowed Hitler to come in. Now, I'm not saying there were no antecedents to that, and historians might say, well, it's the Treaty of Versailles, and maybe even go back further. But the economic cause of Hitler's rise was the hyperinflation of 1923. where the value of the money just dissipated. People would take wheelbarrows full of money to buy a loaf of bread, and instead of working on producing things, they were worried. It's as if the blood wasn't circulating. You sort of have to push the blood around instead of it automatically circulating. So the whole economy sort of fell out. So one of the worst things that a government can do with money is inflate. Now again, we can't give every country a zero because that's in effect saying we're not using that criterion. We need some monetary criterion. So we decided inflation. The higher the inflation, the lower the value the country got in terms of the monetary freedom. It's a little bit of a reach because it's not exactly directly related, but that's what we did. The second criteria is inflation variability. The more variable the inflation, the worse, because people depend upon money to do a certain job, and if the value of it keeps going up and down wildly, it's not going to do its job. The third one is ownership of foreign currency. By the way, we started at 5:20. I'm supposed to go about 45 minutes, so I got another 15 minutes. Is that roughly?
You got 15 minutes to 20 minutes.
I got 15 minutes. I got 15 more criteria. I'll race right through them. 1C is ownership of foreign currency. This we give a dummy variable. Either you're allowed to own foreign currency, in which case you get a 10, or you're not, in which case you get a 0. And the fourth one is maintenance of a bank account abroad. Are you able to maintain a bank account abroad? You get a 10. If not, you get a 0. Okay, so much for the first criteria. We're up to the first 4 of them. Now I'll use Sweden to illustrate the second group, number 2, the government operations business. 2A is government consumption as a percentage of GDP. And by the way, all of our statistics are from places like the World Economic Forum, Price Waterhouse, the World Bank, Freedom House. Freedom House supplied some of the data. So what we're doing here is not so much creating new data, although we do it in some of the criteria. What we're doing is using extant data to define economic freedom. So the higher the percentage of government consumption, the lower the economic freedom. And you can see that Sweden is doing pretty badly. They get a 0 because of, in parentheses, that's the percentage that they use for percentage of the government in the GDP. The third one is government enterprises. Do you have a lot of government enterprises? Well, then you get a low mark. If you have very few government enterprises, you get a higher mark. And again, Sweden is getting 4s. 2C is price controls. Price controls are a violation of economic freedom. If I want to trade you a tie for a wristwatch and you're willing to trade me, and the government says, no, it's got to be 2 ties for 1 wristwatch, or we have a price control on beer or something like that, or on rental units, rent control, that's a lack of economic freedom. That's not allowing people to trade on any mutually agreeable basis. Entry into business. There's this guy, Hernando de Soto, who wrote very glowingly or very tellingly about Peru. And what he did is he tried to open up a store in Peru selling, shoes or something. And it took him 3 years of intensive effort and a lot of bribery to get a legal shoe store open in Peru. Which is one reason that the Peruvian economy is not a good one. Whereas here, you want to open up a shoe store, you open up a shoe store. There might be some government permits you have to get, but it takes, $20 in 1 day. Places like India, it's like Peru. So you have economic arteriosclerosis, frozen economy where you just can't open up a business. And that can't help economic development, and it also we operationally define economic freedom in that way. The legal system, is there the rule of law? Does the government just throw you in jail for batting an eyelash? Well, in Sweden, no, they get a 10. Notice Sweden, in terms of the 4 major categories, they get a 6.9 in money and inflation. They get a 6.7 in government operation, which is pretty good. They get a 0.5 in takings. They're big takers. And in the international sector, which I'll get, they get an 8.7. Namely, they're very economically free internationally, which is what you'd expect, because Sweden is a small country. And if they don't engage in international trade, they're not going to have much of an economy. So a lot of people say Sweden is a socialist economy. They're not. In 3 out of 4 of these criteria, Sweden is a very free enterprise economy, relatively speaking, to other countries. Not relative to the ideal, but relative to other countries. It's only in this takings, which I'll get to when I illustrate the next country, that Sweden falls down because they redistribute a ton of money. That's their big thing. Okay, the next one we'll get into is redistribution. And here we'll use the case of Israel. Sorry, I'm losing it. Pretty soon I'm going to start drooling. So you're lucky I'm not drooling yet. Stop complaining. Higher?
Higher. Other way.
The other higher. Okay, thanks. Okay, now the Israeli economy, you'll notice that the Israeli economy is very, very unfree. And later on, you'll see that their income is not very high. And this is an interesting, instructive country, because Israel has probably got a much higher proportion per capita of people with engineering degrees, PhDs in chemistry, PhDs in physics. They're very smart people. And yet, their economy is intolerable. Part of it is because of the wars, but I think an awful lot of it is because of the socialism that they inherited from the beginning of their country. Who do you think would win in a regatta, an 8-man show? 8 little nerds, all rowing in unison? Or 8 Mike Tysons, all rowing in different directions? Well, obviously the 8 nerds who were coordinated. Because the 8 Mike Tysons would just cancel each other out. Well, economically speaking, Israel is like a bunch of Mike Tysons. They're very powerful, they're very strong, but they're discoordinated, and the price system in economic freedom is the way you coordinate them. There are 2 ways to coordinate. One, an orchestra conductor. I conduct you, and now you're the flute, and I tell you to play, and you're the violin, and you play. I used to play the violin, and every time I play a bad note, the guy would tap his baton and say, block, shape up, do it better, and then start again. You know what they did with the wind players? They would tell them when to breathe. Anyone play a wind instrument here in an orchestra? It's written in the music when you're supposed to breathe. Now, you can't get more totalitarian than that. They tell you when to breathe. I mean, even during slavery in 1850, the boss didn't tell the slave when to breathe. I mean, you can breathe whatever you damn well please. But in an orchestra, they tell you when to breathe. But it's voluntary, so it's okay. Sadomasochism, whatever. The point is, that's one way to coordinate activity, and the analog of the orchestra is central planning. Well, what's the decentralized way of coordinating? The decentralized way of coordinating is through the market. Look, suppose we decide we're big fat slobs and we got to stop eating chocolate, we got to start eating celery. Do we have to petition George Bush and say, George, please get him to produce more chocolate, rather less chocolate and more celery? No. That's the central planning way. We don't do that. Rather, we just stop buying chocolate and start buying celery. What happens to the price of chocolate? It falls. What happens to the price of celery? It rises. Entrepreneurs are led by Adam Smith's invisible hand to stop making so much chocolate, to start making more celery. And that's the way we coordinate in a decentralized way. Well, Israel doesn't do much of that, which is why they have a very poor economy. And you can see that they don't do too well in takings, just like Sweden. Okay, let's now take Hong Kong to illustrate the last 4 in the last 4 of the criteria. This is an international trade. It's so humiliating. I'm trying to pass off as a guy who's, with it. I can't even. I don't know. Okay, the last one is the international sector, and Hong Kong, as you can see, has got 9.2, 9.4, 9.5, 9.3, 9.1. They're always good. There's a very slight variation. They're way at the top. And in terms of the last 4 of their taxes in international trade, tariffs, the black market exchange rates, which is exchange rate control, which is another interference with trade. The third one is our attempt to measure non-tariff barriers, and since I'm running out of time, I'm not going to get behind that one.
You have plenty of time.
Oh, okay. I'll speak slower, and I'll do more now. I've been given an extra 5 minutes, I don't know. And the last one is, are you allowed to engage in capital transactions with foreigners or not? And you can see Hong Kong is getting 9s and 10s all over the place. And now what I've done, I've completed describing at least roughly what the 17 criteria are. And now we come to Exhibit A, Exhibit A is to relate economic freedom with a whole bunch of other things. Remember, we said one of the purposes of inventing this new statistic is to see whether and to what extent it explains things that we're interested in. So let's look at some of these things that we might be interested in. And obviously, one of the things that we're interested in is GDP. There we go. Now, what we have here is A is an 8 or more, B is a 7, C is a 6, D is a 5, F is a 4, and F minus is a 3 or less. So we're converting our numbers into grade point averages or the kind of letter grades that you get in college. And notice that all of those countries that have a level of economic freedom, 8, 9, or 10, there are no 10s, but there are 8s and 9s, their per capita income is almost 16,000. Whereas the next freest set of countries is their income is almost 14,000 per capita. The C's get about 8,000, the D's get about 3,700, the F's get 3,000, and the F minuses get 1,600 per capita. So the A's get about 10 times as much as the F minuses. Is that all clear from the thing? Now notice, when we defined economic freedom, we didn't, what's the word, fudge the books, cook the books. We didn't engage in chicanery. We didn't put in our definition of economic freedom anything that has to do with GDP. We didn't put in wealth, we didn't put in investment, we didn't put in human capital or education. We didn't put any of that. We just said, is the country economically free or not? And if it is, they're very rich. And if it's not, they're very poor. And this is what I call our Exhibit A. This shows that economic freedom really means something. And remember, what economic freedom is if you become the dictator of some country, it's a guide for your action. And the guide is, free up the place. Free up the place, and the people, your citizens, your family members, your tribe, what have you, your clan, will be richer. Now, riches isn't the greatest thing. You know, there's love, there's other things around there. But if you can't eat, if you're hungry, the rest of life isn't going to be good either. I'm not saying that wealth is the be-all and end-all. Although I'm an economist, I'm supposed to have a cash register for a heart and dollar signs on my eyeballs and stuff. I don't. But the point is that wealth is important. If you want to have medical care, if you want to have a Stradivarius violin, if you want to have culture, you have to have some wealth more than the animals have. And there are people that are living a jungle-like existence. It's a horrible existence. They die like flies, their child mortality is horrible. That's no way to run a place. So what I'm saying is if you want to run a good taught ship, you have to have some sort of economic freedom. You have to have some sort of decentralization without this command and control where George Bush or Al Gore or somebody tells you what to do and has price controls, but Hillary runs the healthcare industry or what have you. Okay, so that's Exhibit A. Exhibit B is the relationship of economic freedom, and not with GDP, but changes in GDP. In the diagram below, what we have is the growth rate of a country, or the growth rates of the A, B, C, D, F, and F minus countries, and you'll see that the more free the country is, the faster it's growing. And the less free it is, the lower it's growing, or in the case of the F minuses, they're not growing, they're retrogressing. Sometimes they call them the developing countries. That's just PC crap. They're not developing, they're retrogressing. Now, they call them developing. Maybe if you call them that they'll be there. If you say, here's this rotten kid, and you call him a good boy, maybe he'll behave. But that's not a scientific way to approach this. You want to be accurate in your assessments of what's going on. These are retrogressing countries, and the reason they're retrogressing countries, they don't have any economic freedom to speak of. Okay, so that's Exhibit A and B. And I have an econometric regression that I suppose I could toss at you. I think I can. There it is. It's at the bottom, that econometric equation. What it does is it relates LEF is the level of economic freedom, CEF is the change in economic freedom, and I divided by GDP is the percentage of investment, or rather investments percentage in the GDP. Now, all these have a t-value above 1.96, which is the statistically significant level at the 5% level. Those are the numbers in parentheses underneath. Those are the t-values. For those of you that are into this statistics stuff, how many know what I'm talking about? Oh, okay. Well, that's about a third of the group. The rest of you I can bring along. You see, the mainstream investment, the mainstream development economists focus almost totally on I over GDP. What they say is that the more investment a country has, the richer it'll get, or the bigger the growth rate. The dependent variable is the growth rate on the left of the equation. And it's true that it is statistically significant, but notice that the correlation coefficient is only 0.19, or roughly 0.2 or 1/5, whereas the level of economic freedom is roughly twice as high. So the level of economic freedom contributes twice as much, roughly, as investment as a percentage of GDP. And the change in economic freedom is very, very powerful. It's 5 times more powerful than the investment in percentage of investment in GDP. And this is something that the development economists are even now just become aware of, because we've just invented this statistic. By the way, the publisher of my publication is called the Fraser Institute, Fraser Cato. There's another group, the Heritage Group, which is also doing the same thing from pretty much our perspective. And only they have, instead of 17 criteria in 100 countries, they have like 9 or 10 criteria in 200 countries. See, the idea is the more countries, the fewer the criteria. Because fewer countries have that many criteria that you can get data for. And these are 2 different ways of looking at it, and the correlation of countries that we rank and they rank is very, very high. So we're doing the same thing in different ways, and one is sort of a check on the other, so each one sort of lends support to the other. Okay, so much for the econometrics. What I now have is a whole bunch of very detailed country analyses, and I think I'll skip most of these. I'll just show you one. What this is the level of incomes and growth rates of persistently high and persistently low rated countries. So we have in other words, this is a breakdown of our exhibits A and B respectively. Only now, instead of all the countries, we're taking 5 or 6 countries that are very free on the left side and that are non-free on the right side. So you can see that Hong Kong is about 17,000, and they're growing at the rate of 5.0. Notice that Hong Kong and Singapore are growing much faster than Switzerland, US, Canada, and Germany. So there's more than economic freedom that determines the growth rate. And there are other things beside economic freedom. Economic freedom is important, but there are other things too. Might be necessary, but it's not sufficient. But look at these other countries on the right side. There you have countries that are very low in economic freedom, and their per capita GDP in the upper right-hand box is very low, and in the lower right-hand box, they're retrogressive. Now, I have a whole bunch of slides that I can show you, and I would just humiliate myself further by doing them upside down. So I'm going to go past all of them, and I'm going to go to something of maybe more interest to you. Let me see where I am. Oh, here we go. And I'm going to first talk about economic freedom and serial yields, if I can find it, because I'm skipping way ahead. And here we go. We've got serial yields. Economic freedom and serial yields. You can see that the more economic free a country is, the more cereal it produces. Cereal, why we worry about cereal? Well, cereal is important. Before the communists took over the Soviet Union or Russia, they were exporters of grains. During the communist 70 years, they were importers. And now that they've thrown off communism, they are again becoming exporters of grain. So grain is, nothing to write home about. You don't write home about, hey, Mom, I had my cereal. It's no big deal if you have cereal. But if you don't have cereal, then it's a very important issue. The next indication is economic freedom and life expectancy. Again, the way we define economic freedom has got nothing to do with life expectancy. We didn't say, well, how many vitamins are you having, and do you do your exercise, and do you eat vegan foods or whatever. We didn't have any of that. We talked about monetary policy and tariffs and government intervention and taxes. And lo and behold, the countries that are the most economically free, you live the longest, and in those countries that are the lowest quintile, that are not economically free, you don't live that long. And it's no accident. Okay, and now the last slide I'm going to show you, I think is sort of the piece de resistance. My French isn't that good, but here we go. Where are we? There are a lot of people that worry about income inequality. They say, well, yes, the capitalist system can produce the goods, but they're so unfair. The rich get richer and the poor get poorer. Well, here is a refutation, a statistical refutation of that. What we have here is the ratio of the top 10% of income earners to the bottom 10%. Namely, the higher the ratio is, the more unequal you are. The higher the percentage of the top 10 vis-a-vis the bottom. And there are various ways to do it. You can do it with the Gini coefficient. You can do the top quintile versus the bottom quintile. The top half versus the bottom half. They all come out the same, roughly the same. And you can see that there's not a perfect correlation. There's one, but if you were to draw a least squares line touching the tops of all these, you know it would be downward sloping. Which means that the freer the country, the more equal it is. So our friends on the left, for whom egalitarianism uber alles, should be satisfied with this. They won't be, but they should be if they were consistent with their own views. It's just that their own views are just to bash capitalism. We don't care what the results are, but we don't have to worry about such people. Let me explain to you why it is that this way, why this makes sense. Look, if I'm Bill Gates, I get fabulously rich. But how do I get fabulously rich? I get fabulously rich by enriching everyone else. By making their life a little bit better, because remember they pay $1,000 for a computer, it means that they value that computer at $1,000 and a penny or more. So they gain consumer surplus. So by enriching myself, I enrich everyone else. Take Henry Ford. Before Henry Ford, automobiles were a plaything of the rich. They were a luxury. You wanted a car, you'd get a Rolls Royce or a Stutz Bearcat or a Cadillac or something like that. And only the rich could do that. Now, it's true that Henry Ford, when he made his Model T and his Model 8, didn't get poor people into cars, but he got middle-class people into cars, which is the way these things start. The poor don't get it first, and that's why, the critics of the market say, well, the poor don't have new cars. Well, I remember when they used to show the Olympics, and right after the Olympics, like some some person would win a gold medal, and they'd sort of give you a behind-the-scenes look at his life. And you'd see what it was like, if he was from the U.S. or New Zealand or the Soviet Union. And in the Soviet Union, you know what they'd always show? They'd show the gold medal winner with a little car and an apartment. And I wondered why. What's the big deal? You can work at McDonald's and have a little car and an apartment. What's the big deal? The big deal is that in the Soviet Union, to have a car and an apartment, you've got to be fantastically wealthy. And the gold medal winners in the Soviet Union were treated poorly. But so is anyone with a high school education. You work at McDonald's, you can get a car and a little apartment. Maybe not the richest area. Look, Ray Kroc, the creator of McDonald's, got fabulously wealthy. How did he get fabulously wealthy? He got fabulously wealthy by enriching the lives of everyone else. It's not, like when you're drowning, you push someone down so you get up. That's not the way capitalism works. The way capitalism works, you get up and you pick everyone else with you, behind you, on your coattails. Ray Kroc enriched the lives of millions of people. Before Ray Kroc, a poor family could not go out to a restaurant meal. They had to eat at home. Now they go out to a restaurant. Now it's not the Ritz. It's not the greatest thing, but it's nice. It certainly attracts people in France and in Russia and in China and everywhere around the world. So the reason for this curvature of these squiggly lines here is because in a free economy that relies for the majority of its economic activity on markets, rich people...
No, you're fine.
Oh, okay. I thought I would be given a hook or something. Just another few minutes and then I'll call for questions. The reason that the rich countries have more egalitarianism, not as a goal, but as a side byproduct or by benefit or whatever, is because in capitalism, to become rich, you enrich other people. How does Idi Amin get rich? How do these dictators get rich? How do these 3M types, Mercedes, machine guns and monuments, how do they get rich? Do they get rich by enriching everyone else? No! They get rich by ripping off everybody else. They get rich the way a guy with a gun comes up to you and says, give me your wallet or I'll plug you. Well, you give me your wallet, then I'm richer, but you're poorer. And that's what governments, they're kleptocracies, governments like that just engage in lack of economic freedom. So, to conclude my remarks, and then I'll call for questions and discussion and dialogue if that's your pleasure, is that economic freedom is a good thing, and that we've tried to define a new statistic to bedevil students and make them correlate yet one more thing. And we're very happy because a lot of PhD students are now using our indices to study all sorts of things that we never contemplated that they were correlated with. But that's what you do when you have a successful new statistic. So thanks for your attention.